Welcome to another Fantasy Goodfellas video where we talk about the top 30 running back rankings for Week 9. You ready?
Those Fantasy Goodfellas.
Boom, boom, boom. Rolling on the field.
Those Fantasy Goodfellas.
All right, before we get started, let me remind you that these are not our rankings. We're reacting to them just as much as you are. But what this video does, it tries to point out some trends, some highlights, and get you into this week's lineups, matchups, get you into this week's. But before we get started, let's just look at the rankings and see how everybody performed last week to kind of just take an overall snapshot. So if we look here, Gus Edwards and Jahmyr Gibbs were your two top running backs. And then you had Alvin Kamara just missed the top three. Javonte Williams did well against that Kansas City, so that tells you that the Miami Dolphins have a good chance against Kansas City. Saquon Barkley may get Daniel Jones back. Still think they're going to be dependent on them. And then you got DeAndre Swift, Derrick Henry, and Royce Freeman from the Los Angeles Rams. He entered, and Darrell Henderson. They're split in time. That hurts both. They got Cam Akers is showing up for Minnesota. And then you got DeMarcado from the Arizona Cardinals. If depending on that situation, looks like they might rely heavy on the run. And then that you got Craig Reynolds as well. And I think that is who performs. So if you're looking at who to start, those are a little bit of the trends and the matchups that we got. And so that's what it's going to look like. Now, we're going to get into these rankings. We know you're going to start some of the players that you love or like. Let's just get started anyways. At number 1, you got Saquon Barkley at the Las Vegas Raiders. Saquon Barkley is a stud. And in Week 8, he had 128 rushing yards. That was only good for 12th, though. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Number 2, Josh Jacobs versus the New York Giants. I heard Josh Jacobs' name a lot during that Monday night game. He had 27 receiving yards, 61 rushing yards, and 1 rushing TD. Number 3, Breece Hall at the Los Angeles Chargers. Breece Hall, ever since he complained that he wanted the ball early in the season, he had 6 catches for 76 yards and a TD. It just shows that Breece Hall is explosive. At number 4, Alvin Kamara versus the Chicago Bears. Alvin Kamara is getting back to doing Alvin Kamara things, which is 59 rushing yards, 51 receiving yards, and a touchdown in both the air and the ground. So he's getting there. If you picked Alvin Kamara up late in the draft, you're looking pretty now. At number 5, Jonathan Taylor at the Carolina Panthers. Jonathan Taylor, I haven't seen many Indianapolis Colts game, but if you look, 95 rushing yards and 2 receiving yards. So that's that offense. But with Gardner Minshew, you should expect more. At number 6, Austin Eckler at the New York Jets. I think it's going to be more of a rushing game for Austin Eckler just because those New York Jets secondary has been opportunistic. So I think they're going to try to stay away from that. At number 7, Derrick Henry at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Derrick Henry had a decent game, had 101 rushing yards, 21 receiving yards. You get him involved in the air attack, that's going to help you. But that's all because you had Will Levis, and that is going to be interesting moving forward. That's Tannehill. Is Tannehill going to play again? Not sure. Number 8, Joe Mixon versus the Buffalo Bills. Joe Mixon got into the end zone. He had 87 rushing yards, 23 receiving yards, got into the end zone as well. At number 9, we have Tony Pollard at the Philadelphia Eagles. Tony Pollard had a quiet game, even though everybody else seemed to feast on that team. But he only had 53 rushing yards. But look at everybody else is like eating. Ferguson got into the end zone, 47 yards. CeeDee Lamb had 2 TD game. Brandon Cooks, who is the odd man out? Tony Pollard. Let's hope that he gets back to doing being himself. At number 10 You got Raheem Mostert at the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I think this is a pretty much of a low ranking there. I think Mostert could do a lot more against that Kansas City defense than what they're doing. So ranked 10th, I expect him to do better than that. And so far, if you look at all these rankings, you're starting all those guys. Remember, you have 2 running back slots. That's good for 32 positions. This is not out of the ordinary. That's why we're moving fast. Number 11, DeAndre Swift versus the Dallas Cowboys. DeAndre Swift, he got into the end zone, but if you look at overall, week to week, he is a mid-tier player, but he can light it up. But he's, and I say mid-tier, he's kind of like he's a starter, but he could be your second. He could be the second best running back. Number 12, Bijan Robinson versus the Minnesota Vikings. If there's a week to depend on any Atlanta Falcons players, I think it's this week because it's the first game without Kirk Cousins. I think they're going to be shell-shocked a little bit. Number 13, Gus Edwards versus the Seattle Seahawks. That was your number 1 running back in week 8, and now he's dropped down to 13. Guess they just don't depend on him to have a 3 TD game, and I don't expect that to happen as well. Number 14, Kenneth Walker, the third versus the Baltimore Ravens. Kenneth Walker, 66. He's decent. He's had an okay. But if you want to look at what he's done throughout the season, he has been in the top 10 3 of the 7 weeks he's played. So Kenneth Walker should hold his own. And number 15, Ramondre Stevenson versus the Washington Commanders. Now, what's going on with this team? Can you depend on anybody? 39 rushing yards, 11 receiving yards. That's not cutting it. I'm not depending on Stevenson to win you any games. Number 16, Isaiah Pacheco versus the Miami Dolphins. Pacheco's been quiet. I like this kid. It just doesn't seem the game plan always works out. Maybe the offense is becoming too dependent on the Kelsey, Travis Kelsey. And I think that hurts Isaiah Pacheco. I think that they need to try to run the ball first and then pass, right? You're going to pass it anyways. But I think that's where I'd like to see them try to run it more. Number 17, Darrell Henderson Jr. at Green Bay Packers. The only problem with Henderson here is if he's splitting carries, he's not going to get the touches. But he had 12 rushing attempts, 3 catches. That was good for 85 yards. I still think that this is high just because if you keep on splitting the carries. Number 18, Rachaad White at the Houston Texans. Rachaad White had a decent game, 39 rushing yards, 70 receiving yards. So they just need to get him involved any way they can. Number 19, Aaron Jones at versus the Los Angeles Rams. Aaron Jones is not Aaron Jones of the past few years. He seems to regress, seems to be hurting now that Aaron Rodgers was gone. Number 20, James Cook at the Cincinnati Bengals. James Cook hasn't done much, hasn't needed to do much, but it looks like they just depend on Josh Allen to do anything. So if you're not catching the balls out of the air, out of the backfield, you're not going to have that decent of a game. And I think it's really dependent on if he can get into the end zone. Number 21, you got Jerome Ford versus the Arizona Cardinals. I like Ford this week. I would depend on him. I think he can do some good things against that defense. Number 22, Emery DeMarcado. You're going to have to look up how to say that, at the Cleveland Browns. And if you're starting this is going to be your third quarterback possibly, that's not going to do good. You got Tune coming in to do good. So I expect him to get the carries, though. Number 23, Zach Moss at the Carolina Panthers. Zach Moss, he had 1 rushing TD, 66 rushing yards, 80 receiving yards. That was there. Number 24, Najee Harris versus the Tennessee Titans. Now, again, Harris has been good last year. So let's just look at his bar chart. He hasn't cracked 100 yards yet. So is that line terrible? What's holding him back? Can't be that it's a passing offense. Pickett's just isn't that good. So I just think they need to get Harris involved more. And again, Harris might be hurting because now he's not with Roethlisberger. At number 25, Dameon Pierce versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had 46 rushing yards and not too good. But this seems to be geared towards a passing offense, and that is your stars. Tank Dell didn't do good. Nobody really stood out. Just very quiet game in week 8. At 26, you got Brian Robinson Jr. at the New England Patriots. Now, 1 minute you think the New England Patriots are bad. Next minute they're shutting down Kansas City's offense. Is that correct? No. That's Denver. My bad. 1 minute New England's terrible. Next minute they're decent. So I think Brian Robinson could do well. I like maybe just bail it out, dump it off to the running back when the pocket breaks down is how you're going to get some yardage from him. 27, Alexander Madison at the Atlanta Falcons. I think this is where I'd be dependent on a running attack when it comes to Minnesota, just because now you're still devastated because Cousins is no longer there. The problem I don't like, what I see here, is 16 attempts, 1.9 yards per carry. Unless you're getting in short yardage situations and that can skew your stats, that's terrible. At number 28, Chuba Hubbard versus the Indianapolis Colts. Chuba Hubbard had, 54 total yards. If I don't know anything that happened, I'm going to have to look at my stats to kind of remind me, where's Chuba Hubbard on all this? He's nowhere to be found, although he's the 29, 35, 34, 38, 6, 34. In my opinion, that's a starter. That's if you have 2 running back spots, those stats get you in there. At 29, Royce Freeman at the Green Bay Packers. Again, I don't understand why you're putting 2 running backs in the top 30 for the Rams. I don't expect both of them to do well. And at 30, A.J. Brown and A.J. Dillon versus the Los Angeles Rams. Again, you got 2 running backs that in the top 30. I just think that's a stretch for them as well. All right, that is going to do it for the top 30 running back rankings for Week 9. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and good luck in Week 9.
Those fantasy good fellas.
Rolling on the field.
Those fantasy good fellas.